Yeah, first of all, I really wish to thank the invitation, the opportunity to be here and share our experience. Please let me know if you don't hear me, so if I have to speak louder. So, yes, the main idea, the main project that I want to talk about is La Borda. It's a housing cooperative, but I thought it was interesting to introduce some points. So first of all, I want to introduce about Lacol. Lacol is so I'm a member of a cooperative of architects. So we work collectively, and we wanted to also to share our work, our way of working also here, to understand a little bit more about how we work and the kind of projects we work on it, and also our relation with the city, the neighborhood where we were placed, and the territory. So the second point is this idea of cooperative housing as a new model to have access to housing, and the context of Barcelona. The main part is this idea of La Borda, from the development process, how it's all the development been done, and the architectural outcome that as a result of a process. So understand architecture more as a process, not as just a construction result, outcome. And the last, and really briefly, I wanted to talk about like new projects that are being developed after La Borda. So it's been more as a pilot experience that had become housing policy in Barcelona with an open competition for new plots. So it's interesting to see it's a kind of seed of new projects. So just the first point. We were 14 architects that we studied all together, and we finished more or less maybe 8 years ago. And since then, each of us had developed different lines, interests, and studies after architecture, so understand these different layers of our work and different paths and ways to understand the architectural practice, from social, urban socialism, from urban planning, from construction and carpentry, from participation. So different, it's a kind of umbrella that allows us to develop as professionals in a collaborative framework. We rent this space as students during the final project to share knowledge, facility, nights, and all that is mean the university moment. And this idea of being in the street with the relation of the neighbors also enables us to understand how our final project can be related with the society and with the neighborhood, and each of us study different points in the neighborhood. One of these points, well, this is the area, so we rent this space in Sants because of a kind of geographical part, was next to the main train station in Barcelona, and was a kind of random in a way, or we didn't know so much about the place before arriving, but that changed our life in a way, because it was the main political neighborhood. Also has a strong network of cooperativism, social movements. So we as students also learn about this reality of the neighborhood. We kept in touch with the social movement, and we were involved in it. So this idea of any of the people who are doing activism in the city give their tools, and as architects or as students, we give our tools to think, to have reflection, and to make statements in the city transformation. So this is, and three of us made the final project in this area. Was a formal industrial area that was a quarter of the neighborhood. So it was a huge empty space that was waiting for the urban plan to be developed with social housing, with facilities, with green areas. But with the starting of the crisis, the municipality and the private sector stopped everything. So the neighborhood started to organize themselves, and in the 11th of June of 2011, we had a huge demonstration, and it was also as a party. It was not violence. It was really a beautiful moment from all the neighborhood entering to this site. So then the municipality has no ideas, has no budget, has no capacity to take part in this the transformation of this part of the city, and allowed the neighborhood to enter and to self-manage one of the blocks. So this was the beginning of the. So the neighborhood has a strong idea of cooperativism neighborhood and a kind of utopian idea of bottom-up process. So Can Batlló was just the empty space to came to the reality, all those like theoretical ideas, and this desire of taking an active role as a citizen of the city transformation. So in the neighborhood, it was also anthropologists and sociologists, and also really different spaces of reflection. And it was just in a moment where the welfare state and the welfare services and everything was breaking a little bit. So it was this idea how a cooperative neighborhood can give services and can solve our daily needs in a different way from the state for the public sector. So with these ideas on mind, we start this colonization of this industrial fabric. So we start here. This was this social center, this first block. Here was this photo of the demonstration of this entering day, and just 6 years later, we had from a theater. We have a printer, we have different workshops, we have a cafeteria, an auditorium, spaces for artists. We have also spaces for green vegetable gardens, for dogs in the park. We have spaces for children, and all is self-managed. So in that context, a group of people in 2011 started to think also about housing. So, and I'm starting also to do that because this was one of the final projects for us as students, and we were involved and we knew the people. So our first practice was helping people doing self-construction with the resources, with the time, and with the capacity of the people. So our first contact with participation was really the construction ourselves as part of the neighborhood, different spaces in this first block of Can Batlló. And with the different woods and materials, we start to do some different spaces for the city, for this idea of also giving a technical solution from the different challenges. So it was an industrial block. We had no stairs. We had really narrow evacuations inside the building. So trying to think with people what they need and how we can build it. So we had been working several different years in that place, and also understanding how we can do super small intervention to change the spaces. And here was also the first box office for, I don't know how to say it in English. It was a space to grow cooperative as a... Exactly. This was an incubator and was also a project in collaboration with the municipality, because the municipality realizes the power of the people and ideas really connected with the places, and also give the path to change this area. So we were working all together. And with the idea of incubator of social economy and this idea of being involved of this network of cooperative, we as architects also started to change this space. It's going to be our new space with 8 or 9 more cooperative from newspapers, from understanding as architects we are part of the network, and we have in contact with other disciplines. And this idea of working in the neighborhood, be involved with different cooperative projects, and also understand this transformation and building with the people, it was our base of our practice. So I choose 2 sentences of Giancarlo De Carlo, this idea of professionals are against participation because it destroys the arcane privilege of specialization. So also this idea of we were really in a transversal way, in the same level as every of the other neighbors of the neighborhood. And also, I really like this, no? So understand that architecture or the city planning also has become too important to leave just to architects. And we learn a lot about each of the people who is part of this project. So we really reconsider what we have learned in the university and how we can do our daily practice with these values. So we started working with different municipalities in different kind of projects, introducing this idea of participation in the different areas. So for example, here we were playing with in a youth center in a poor neighborhood in one of the surroundings of Barcelona, and just with paintings and different furniture, we were working with kids. And also in one of the main design museums, it was Barcelona have a prize to good urban experiences all over the world, because I think it's quite like this idea that Barcelona considers itself that has the ability or the power or the knowledge to have a prize to other cities. And we wanted to break this distance of what is a prize, the museum and the city itself, because it was about urban experiences. And we took like the limits of the museum, and we also took these urban experiences and the same information of the exposition to the streets, with this idea of having paper in different walls and breaking the rules of the museum, and that allows inside the museum and that was allowed in the city. And also different spaces for a museum, it's a space in the Science Museum for kids to having experimental issues, so we were practicing with them and designing with them to do the space. So it's different scales and different projects, and how it's important for us to work with people. And now, just these days in Barcelona, there is a huge prison inside the city that has to, it's been moved to another town, but it's a huge facility that have to be reconsidered by the neighborhood. So we are doing workshops with them to think what it's going to be this place that it's just four of the main squares of the city. So it's just to understand how we were really used to break this distance between the people and our work. So with these ideas, we started to think about housing. So it was a huge housing crisis from 2017 to 2014. And when Campbell starts in 2011, it was just that point that it was a poor and a medium-class neighborhood with a lot of people having problems with housing. So in the relation of Campbell, a group of people started to think how we can collectively resolve our need of housing. And in that point, we also, as architects, we were really interested in this idea of studying different ways of having access to housing and different models. So we start to also understand how housing is a cross-sectional issue in our daily life, understand how having access to formal housing gives also having access to the city. Also this idea of stability, of idea of even health, because we are also starting to study with the health agency of Barcelona this effect of cooperative housing in health, because you can study about this paper of the community, this paper of stability, affordability, this relation with the services in the city, with your family and friends during time in a place. So understand that having access to a house is more than just a roof, it's having access to the city, to the services, to the possibility to develop our daily life as adults, to have a family. So we really put the focus in this pillar position of housing for our, and also how there are different points, right? So for example, energy poverty. So we have an increase of the housing prices, but we have also an increase of energy prices. So people cannot afford to live in the city, but even can less afford to have the heating system. So we are having more and more problems of health within people with elderly or young or child. So we wanted to have a transversal solution to that problems, but also the main point was the cultural issue. So since the dictatorship in Spain, we have the idea of be owner of your house. So we are an owner society, and Barcelona was the city with a percentage average of renting higher in Spain. So in Barcelona we have a 60% of ownership. Most of them is part of the banks because people have not finished to pay the mortgage and the loans. We have a 30% of renting and just other kind of tenancies, but the idea is we have just 1.5 part of social housing. So the market is totally controlled by, the housing market is totally controlled by international funds, and speculation is the main problem that is every day in the news. So people is being moved, there are gentrification problems. It's also rates of tourism floods that it's affecting a lot the central areas because people wanted to have more and more benefits of the housing properties. So the main idea was realizing how property is also part of that system and also is something that we have to give an alternative. We also had here, is in Catalan, but some images from last year. We have an increase in Barcelona city, that is the first diagram, an increase of the prices. And also we realized that the grand part of this increase of the prices was related with renting, because during the crisis where the flats were really cheap, really international funds bought a grand part of the renting stock. So now they are increasing the rents to have more and more benefits. So the more vulnerable people is who is renting, because also the regulations are giving less and less power. And nowadays we have 3 years current contracts. So every 3 years people have to move or have to negotiate the increasing of the contract. So people it's totally unstable as a nomad inside the city, and we want to find if in different countries we can look for alternative. So that's why we call it a session of use model. It's widespread in countries such Denmark or in different points like Uruguay. In Denmark, for example, it was policies from the 70s, 60s, 70s, where in the center of the city were all buildings of vertical property that were really with the need of intervention, and the state decided that an idea to provoke like the restoring and the inversion in the buildings could be that the people who is living has a cooperative of be owner of the building, but just as a part. So they are starting to do cooperative of vertical property because the people who is living have the capacity to change their building. So with this idea was growing and growing, and now the 30% of the Denmark city stock of housing is with cooperative. And in a super different context in Uruguay, it was a part of a social policy a strategy where the state gives land and give materials or give money for materials, and the people are taking important role in all the development, and also they are construction. So in different contexts, there are different like arguments or needs that are solved with this model. So basically, it's a non-speculative model that is based in the use of value in the housing, and it's avoiding this exchange value of the market. So the cooperative is the owner of the building, and the people who is going to live there can live for life, and they have a contract of use of one of the flats, but the people who is living cannot sell or rent for a higher price. So it's a way to broke this possibility of a speculation, the people who is living in a place. So the idea is we have just 1.5 part of social housing. This is idea of trying to increase a kind of back of non-speculative housing in the city of Barcelona. So basically, when you have no speculation, and the idea is just to pay for the use of a house. We are also getting affordable monthly quotes, and having this idea of as a cooperative, as an infrastructure that is resilient in the city, because cannot be this community move because of someone is trying to or is interested in that building. So this is a legal framework that also is changing in different parts of Spain, because the cooperative law is depending the different areas. And also it's really important to understand how this legal framework allows this kind of initiative. So understanding how when we are looking in Denmark about like the legal framework, for sure it's different from the cooperative legal framework in Spain and also in Uruguay. But it's this idea of pressing for having this idea of cession of use, right of use, this idea of different ways of relation with the houses. And before enter inside like the Laborda process, we wanted also to understand this idea of housing cooperative as an opportunity for social transformation. And why we say this? Because sometimes we understand that we are not doing cooperatives, we are promoting cooperativism and future cooperative, we call it cooperativistas, that is the people who is living there. So it is idea that it's an empowered process of the people to solve their needs, the need of housing, but also, for example, in our case, the need of work. So how through cooperative that can give service, can give work, can give purchase, can give housing. So and this idea of really took the control in a good sense of your daily life, organizing with the people who have the same goal for reach or solve this need. And also understanding how when you are talking about housing, we are talking about daily routines and the domestic, in the domestic sphere. So understand how the daily organization inside a cooperative can also be really transformative and radical in the way that we are doing things in a different way that it's pre-established. So cooperative has this idea that each group has to define which are their needs and what they want to share. So it's understand that it's a housing, so it's a shelter, but inside houses, each of us, we do different activities, we have different needs, and it's really different. For example, in my case, that I'm all day working, I'm all day out of the house. I do few things, and for example, if I find a group of people that I can share, for example, the activity of it, it's going to be easier for me because I don't have time to do it. But this is my need, but inside the community we can share different activities and we can put in common different things. The energy supply, the mobility, even the economy, because each project that we are having collective loan to take. So each of these groups in the territory have different needs and can decide itself which part of their daily life can share. But also this is an idea to break this point of individuality that it's associated to the property. So it's just understand that maybe if we put the focus on the property and the property market and what gives this access to housing in an individual flat in the middle of the city has consequences on what kind of point we can decide of our daily life. So this is a little bit about the context. So this idea of really took an active role, and I will start about Laborda. So Laborda is this group of people from Can Batlló, related with the neighborhood, that has the main goal, so ensure access to affordable and decent housing. It was the first this political idea also to avoid the speculation use of housing. So it was the beginning. We start to moving forward, to start to talk with the municipality, with different entities of the social economy to have economical support for the project. And when we go further with this idea of develop for ourselves housing, we realize that we have other smaller goals, but also really important. So this idea of it's production of housing, but it's also management and ownership of housing. When we talk about management with the social public housing institution, it's the main problem. They have a super huge problem with the management of social housing, and they are not thinking in different ways of living in common areas and this idea of community, because they cannot manage. So they are open this kind of projects because give also a solution of some of the public problems of social housing. So it's also a way of produce new forms of coexistence, social relations, and community self-organization. So it's this idea of be part of a community in a moment that if we are looking of the different statistics of the city, we are living alone. So there are smaller units of convivence in the society. We are living in smaller families, smaller groups. So it's idea that came from our need or our social transformation and evolution, but also give a framework of relations and support. Also, the Laborda has a gender perspective, really wants to break and work with this idea of the woman in the domestic sphere. And so how this kind of project also can promote equal relationship between people of different ages, genders, especially genders and origins. Because when we are talking about domestic space in this kind of political project, we always start from this idea that we have the same rights and women than men. But when we start talking with the people who is involved, and they are really political conscious, but they have different between what we took as a woman in the care of the kids, in the care of the house. So this kind of projects also wants to break and give more equality, and I will talk a little bit more about this. Also, it's becoming an alternative of traditional public housing, affordable for people with low incomes. And this idea I will also repeat in the end. It started as a bottom-up experience. We had this relation with the municipality, but in the last housing plan of Barcelona had introduced housing cooperative as an action to increase affordable housing. So it's interesting to see how a pilot experience, totally independent of the public structure, is being something as an example to follow. And this idea of be part of a self-managed neighborhood in Can Batlló, this idea of social commitment, and also how we understand this power of the people and we work with it in a way. And the last point was this idea of ecology. So also when people is putting the values in the development process, the benefit is not the main goal. So we can have social, but also this idea of be more sustainable with the resources. And here we have the General Assembly of Laborda. It's a community of 50 people from different origins, parts of Barcelona, and different backgrounds, also different ages and needs, that were all together with this idea of a different way of living. And this is interesting to understand, this idea that it's a long process of empowerment, and where the different agents, where also the architects here, took part in different moments. So we have like the legal and financial development. It was like the main part. We started in 2012, and the first 2 years, it was this idea of looking for models, this approach of the experiences, also start studying these different examples abroad, because I was talking about Denmark or Uruguay, but we have a huge paper of cooperativism housing in Zurich. We also in French, in England. So if you start to look for it, there are alternatives and solutions in that way in lots of countries, even in North America, Canada, Brazil, etc. So it was interesting to see these models, and also starting to organize ourselves with just this idea of one assembly. In 2014, We had a huge presentation of the main ideas of the project, and we increased the group to this 50. At the beginning, it was like maybe 15 person. It was really small idea. It was this idea that we were not sure if we could find this model, this legal framework, and also this the support from the municipality or from different social economy banks. But during this approach process, we find like a good feedback from the different areas. So we made a presentation of the project, and it was really neat because a lot of people were interested and joined to the project. So we started a 3-year period to develop the legal, the economical, the model of conviviality, and also the architectural part. So as architects, we started in 2014, and we are now construction. We are going to finish before summer, but this idea is, it's a long process that needs effort as architect, but also the people who is taking part of all the decision process during all these years. And it's interesting that also this timeline gives the possibility to have a lot of reflection, also break some of the prototype and standard things that we have in our daily life, and also the opportunity to have a lot of debates and reflection with architects, but also with the environmental consultant that took an important role to define the needs in every moment with this idea of sustainability. So, and finally, in the February of 2017, we start the construction, that it should take a year and 14 months, but it's going to be a bit longer, and we are going to finish in a month and a half. So at the end of this year, we are starting to live. So at the end, it's going to be a 7-year process, where the organization was really important also to make possible this. So we start with this General Assembly. We made commissions of the different needs of the group, from shared living or conviviality, communication, the legal part, economy and funding, architecture, and communication. So in each commission was formed by people from the cooperative that were not technical. So the architectural commission were formed by people who is not architect. So then is when I start Lacol as an architect cooperative, giving technical support. So this idea how we have a commission that is the link with the General Assembly. It's a group of people that is going to be empowered and have a lot of knowledge to have this link with all the group, and giving us like the main lines, the main principles of all the development. It's also interesting to understand how all these projects or all this technical support, it's also part of social economy. So it's also in the way we are developing housing in another way, we are promoting a social economy. And the financial structure was also really important. In the sense we wanted to do affordable housing, the construction budget was the main part of the funding structure. So as architects, we had to work with a low budget per square meter. We will see it later. And also this idea how we can, this kind of projects, get the financial support. And we found different systems. There is our own capital of the cooperative. We have loans and titles from the social economy. So it's a financial service cooperative that give the money into the cooperative, but also made issue of titles or stocks of the project that makes that a lot of people, almost 800 entities, institutions and people, had a title and a stock of 1,000 euros of the project. So at the end, also the financial structure is made by the collaboration of people, and it's avoiding the main bank institutions. And the last part was grants and non-refundable. So it was basically this idea of collaborative funding structure. And the last point was how we can say it's affordable. We have an initial down payment that have this the own capital of the cooperative. it's around 18,500 euros per unit. That we can say that maybe the lower incomes family, it's a challenge to have this money, but we have also don't have solidarity process and helping each other to achieve the initial down payment. But then the monthly quotes, it's the medium 450 euros. That is even less than it's half of the medium rent in Barcelona nowadays. So I think in the main areas of the Barcelona, we have the 900, 800 euros for a small flat and all flat. So we are getting efficient and with shared facilities housing with the half price of the market or even instability. But it was really important also to work with the budget of the project. And arriving in that point, we will start to talk about the participation in architecture. So, as I was saying, this is Can Batlló, and we had, it was a plot of the city that it's also interesting to understand how the different agents are transforming the city. Here we have like the old buildings. Here we have all the private plots, because here we have the main road to the airport and the city center, and the private has like the main facade to the industrial premises. And the urban planning defines all this area that is relation with the old neighborhood as a barrier, as a border to the park. So the Assembly of Can Batlló and the neighbors involved wanted to break this idea of having a wall of social housing that it was facing to the old neighborhood, and a park, a green park for towers and public of the private sector. So the idea was starting to work also with the municipality, because it was interesting to see how the municipality is recognizing that the Assembly of the Neighbors, it's an important agent in this territory, and they have the capacity to sit in a table and decide about the urban transformation. So at the end, we have done different streets and open and have different small changes and different corridors and paths inside the buildings to allow this permeability through the park and the new area and the neighborhood that's really dense and without any kind of facility and green park. So we had this plot that the municipality offers to the cooperative, because the first idea was to restore one of the existing industrial blocks, but this was not possible because it was all for facilities. So we accepted this plot. So it's interesting to see that in a city like Barcelona, we have really few plots available, and they are super expensive. So the opportunity to develop this kind of process in public land makes affordable. Otherwise, it's not for lower or medium class projects. And also it was interesting to understand this important paper of the citizens also in housing policies, and this collaboration between the private and the public sector for the social benefit. Also, it's interesting to understand that for us, we understood the housing cooperative as a framework for the social innovation, because at the end was like the sharing leadership of people giving solutions to the social needs. And also it was interesting to see how this kind of project has crossed this idea is challenged by the sustainability of a social, environmental, and economical way. So the first step for as an architect, and here we start to work with environmental consultancy, was to really know the profile of the people who is going to live. And I think it's also one of the main potential of this kind of project. So we normally, when we are designing collective housing, we don't know who is going to live there. It's the difference between a small one-family house that we have the client and we can study their really needs. In the case of collective housing, this is rarely. So with La Borda, we considered that point as the main potential, and we made an interview to each of the units to define the scenario before the cooperative and have the possibility to have a comparison with the future scenario of ones living there. And it was interesting to understand that there are different issues that they are not directly related but with architecture, but have also influence in the daily routines. So we divide in two parts this questionnaire, this survey, and we ask about the family structure, about the incomes, about the characteristics of the neighborhood, about like the transport and the daily routines in mobility, about how they have access to housing now, if it's renting, ownership, which part of their incomes is related to the having access to housing. Also, this idea of know about incomes, that sometimes is some taboo thing that people don't want to talk about money, and also about energy. So with the part 2, we start to know about this idea of energy poverty, so the impact of the energy bills in the cost of housing. So also about heating, about refrigeration, about health, about temperatures, about the dynamics if they close the windows during the day in summer and they open in night. So if they have an idea of how it's the good way to use the house to have the comfort and a healthy environment. And also this gives us this idea, the different profiles, and also the footprint, the sustainability and the ecological footprint. So with this profile, we had one idea of the main points for architectural. We saw that this idea of the typical family is not existent anymore, or is not as important anymore. So the typology of different households is super important. We have a lot of people living alone, almost 40% of the people from different ages and gender is living alone. Mainly young people and old people, but we have the different ages. Couples without kids, it's also another point. Family with kids was just the 30%, and we are always designing collective housing for the prototype of family with 2 kids and a couple. And it also was really interesting to see that there were some adults that they are cohabitation as an established way of living. So, for example, it's 4 adults, 2 of them are alone mothers, I don't know how to say it, so they are also sharing the care of the kids and giving support. So we have a small community inside the community. So this was the idea of having an open infrastructure that gives us the possibility to have several types of typologies inside the building without defining for every member, because we have an infrastructure that can people be part of the project but can also leave it, because the session of use also gives this flexibility of be part of the project in a moment and leave. And the other point was really understand how budget, it was important. We had to reduce as much as possible the budget of the building, because we need affordable monthly quotes, because the incomes of the units were really low. And nowadays, before the project, the 40% or the 0.5% were paying 40, almost 50. It's something normal in Barcelona. So it's recommended, or it's a recommendation that the incomes, the housing cost, it's the 30% to consider affordable housing. And we have that the half of the group of people is paying the 50% of the incomes to having access to housing. So like to have a sustainability in an economical way in the family unit, we had to reduce as much as possible the monthly quotes. And if you have problems to pay the house, you have also problems to pay the energy bill. So the 1/3 of the people were having energy poverty. And what was sad in a way, that they are not knowing that they were in energy poverty. So it was also it's important to understand how these kind of projects give information to people to understand that if they have 15 grad Celsius inside house in winter, they are in energy poverty, and the kids can have problems with the breath system, etc. So it was surprising even for them as a community see that they had a huge problem. And the last point was about mobility. In Barcelona, we have a regulation that we have to build one parking place for each housing, or even 2 or even more if the flat is bigger. And we wanted to really reduce the economical impact of the construction, but also the environmental impact. We had to reconsider this. So one of the main challenges of this project was going and change the housing regulation in Barcelona, or avoiding as much as possible to be free to do something different. And in the mobility part, it was super difficult, and we start a process of 18 months working with technical staff in the municipality, trying to find a solution to avoid the construction. And the idea was doing a change in the urban planning of Barcelona, understanding that mobility is something important to reconsider in the main cities and the paper of the car, but also in Sants, its neighborhood with a main central station, this connection with the airport. We were in a position in the city where we can also talk about different other systems of mobility. And when we start to thinking about the program of the houses, it was this idea of having community areas. So we have a lot of debates to have this equilibrium or the balance between what we need as an individual in a private unit and we have as a community area, a part of stairs and the other parts of the common areas typically in a collective housing. So finally was this idea of having more or less 10 square meters per unit that we give to the community, because we can share the laundry, we can share some part of the storage, we can share a guest room. So which part of the reflection was to understand which part of our daily house, of our actual house, it's underused, it's not having intense use, and what part is also in a heating area as a storage, a cupboard, etc. We can give it out of the. So this kind of reflection, it was done also by participation. And it was important to give a lot of pedagogy. So understand, for example, as a really extreme example, no? Say we don't have an elevator for each flat. Why we have washing machine for each flat? Because in Europe it's really typical to have some kind of laundry, etc. In Spain it was this kind of common areas. They are not real, they are not existent. So it's cast this idea of thinking and changing these routines or the conventions. Also understanding that if we have a low budget but we want to have common areas, we have to reduce. We cannot build the same number of flats and plus common areas plus etc. So it's the idea of we have to reduce the private to have more for services. And this was also done by participation. So we were doing a study of how we are living and what activities of our daily life we can do together. So we've done some kind of these tables with description of needs, where we have to put this in relation with the terraces, in relation with the street, with activity. So it was understanding what we are going to ask to the architectural about our daily program. And finally, it was interesting to see how it was focused on really reproductive tasks, that we call it. So this kind of task that we are doing to the care of the body and the care of also about clothing, so really main activities. It was not for a space for parties or a pool or something like it was a kind of some luxury. We really put the focus on about the kitchen, the spaces, people who is working now at home, because we are also changing this kind of dynamics. We also thinking about the activities of the cooperative, this idea of assembly, this idea of common activities, laundry, guest room, and health area. So it's something that we are doing every day some kind of activities like this, but also this idea of the bike parking, because we are avoiding to have the cars by ourselves. This idea of common areas to relation, this idea of also outdoor spaces and a storage. So it was also to select the main point, because we cannot have as much as we want inside the building. And also all these kind of debates were having this view of sustainability and the economical impact. And the parking consideration, it was also really interesting to understand the individual cost of having a car. So always was this idea of, from the individual, we are creating collective housing, but also the impact is going in one way all the time. And also this idea of the expectations or the needs of each of us are different, so finding what we are really sharing, the main needs. And it was really important how architects we work with other disciplines, and during the process of Laborda in the Commission of Conviviality was service design role. It was important to understand that if we have a kitchen, we can use it in a different ways. And we were doing theater and role playing, and also it was interesting to understand really the impact and the evaluation. And the Conviviality Commission do a really great work. For example, in the case of the laundry, they realized which kind of process or need or activity is going to have in each moment. So, for example, if we want to put the washing machine, we have to have the reservation, we have to move, we have to put it in the sun. So each activities, what is affecting, and having different scenarios, so from a self-managed to a professional people who is helping with professional machines, for example. No? And it was really important to understand the results, so how these projects also have an effect in for more sustainable ways of living, and how many the liters of water and the electricity saving, the time of the cost, so how this effect in our daily life of this kind of new ways of living. And the same, for example, as the kitchen. So it was this idea, they have to be really open, that the people is living different, that they have different schedules, different ways of living, and we are doing an infrastructure of living, but we are not doing a way that all the people have to live in the same time and use the space at the same time, only having lunch all together. So with this idea of different ways of use it, it was also interesting of analyzing this idea of gender, and seeing lots of references in the north of Europe found that when we are doing, when we are socializing in the daily routines of cooking and eating, we are finding the 50% of equity in the gender roles and equity. So it was really interesting to see from the social sustainability and the former democratic societies how these kind of spaces have a really impact, and also in the sustainability. So in each of the spaces we have a different kind of evaluation and different kind of goals for the take decisions. So here we had the main challenge of the building. We wanted a super efficient building, and we also have the maximum qualification. It's an A, but we have a low budget. So it was really important to define which was the goals in the environmental inputs: energy, water, materials, and residues. That means that's the pieces that it's, I don't know how to say it. When you are construction and have like what is not being used more. When, see, exactly, waste. So the energy and water, as much as we reduce the consume of the needs of energy and water, this has a direct impact in comfort and in the price of living. As much as we reduce the materials or the kind of materials that we use and the waste, it's also have sometimes an increase. It's the idea of wood is expensive, it's more expensive than concrete. So this idea of having the balance, we wanted to build in a more sustainable way, but with a small budget. So it was this fine which kind of parts of the building has a huge impact, for example, the structure of the building, so put the focus in that part. So it was this idea of reduce as maximum energy, the water was a medium part, as much as possible materials, and also the waste, we are finding ways of doing this. And with this inputs from energy, from program of daily routines, we start the architectural part. As the land is from the municipality, it's public land, the people who is going to live in La Borda has to follow the criteria of social housing. That means that you have a maximum of incomes and you have no properties. So this is something that maybe I haven't explained. So entering to the building, so the general characteristics was it was a plot in between buildings with a good facade. When we can, so it was a deep plot in between two buildings with a 6-floor regulation in the south facade that is facing the park, and the north facade to the neighborhood with 4 levels, and also the main street. So to solve this idea of the depth and the different typologies, it came this idea of also the courtyard. Also, it reminds traditional housing cooperative from the south of Spain called Corrala. That's also around the courtyard and puts the center of the community. So we have in the ground floor a corridor, the public corridor. It's always open, that connects the park with give continuity to a street and the old part of the neighborhood. And we have the mixed use spaces. So here it's the co-working area, or it's more about economical project, that it's going to be a cooperative of purchase, of consume for vegetables and different things that is going to be used. This multi-purpose room in the lower level, because it's where the sun is not going to arrive never, and it's always a punctual discontinuous use of the common areas. We have also the guest rooms, in the second floor with the stairs in connection with the common areas, the laundry, and in facing with the park we have the kitchen and dining room and the more like the meeting point of the cooperative. Over we have all the housing units that are facing, we are densifying the south facade that has a perfect sun captation, and we have working with giving the maximum of compactness of the build. We can see it better in this image of the environmental behavior of the building. So this idea of maximizing the south facade, we have 24 of the 28 flats in total. 24 are in the south facade, and the 4 are in the higher part of the north, that they have direct light almost through the patio, through the courtyard. So we have this idea of compactness. So we have this closed atrium that is open in summer, and this is done with the same systems as the greenhouses in the vegetable extension. So it's a really simple technology, because with a cheap system we can have this effect. So we're having this idea also of different layers to protect the south facade. Here is a kind of really simple plastic layering, a kind of gallery also, and in summer this also typical and traditional simple shadow system. So all really from the tradition. So we also reduce the air thickness inside the buildings, lower than the standards. Also, this idea of the optimal solar shading in south is super important because it's a south facade, so we have sun almost every hour during the day. But also, it was very important this idea of the balcony that allows that the sun it's not entering in the inside of. So just this idea of passive solutions to reduce as maximum, and the cross ventilation through the courtyard. So we have different like sensors of temperature and CO2 to control the quality of the air, and it's going to open monitoring all the different, all the flats. The person who lives in have to be aware of the condition and have an active role, because we have budget to put domotic system inside the housing, so it's all done by the people, just like the main cover of the atrium has this. We have thermal mass dimensioned by the summer comfort needs inside the building, this idea of working with inertia, with thermal mass, and also very low demands of heating, because at the end, how the passive give so much comfort that we don't need. So we have centralized collective central heating system by biomass, but wood, and also if we can see here is this idea that the level is from the ground. We get to manage to not construction the parking. So, and when we start to think about the typology, we also did this kind of diagram with people, so realizing how, if we study ourselves during all the timeline, so for example, this example with me, my family, we were 4 members. Once my parents were divorced, we were in the same house, living 3. Then I went to university, and in the same house, it was just 2 persons. Then I arrived in a typical flat for a family with different kids, but we were 4 adults living there. So one had the huge room, another one had different kind. So, for example, this is a scenario, I have a couple, then I have kids, maybe the kids are growing, so it's this idea of our needs, and our needs of a space is changing always. And if we compare the periods of time during life that we have this kind of a structure of conventional family are lower than all the, and this idea was all this black mass that we have on the 6th floor on site around this courtyard is idea of open infrastructure, a matrix of rooms that can be connected in different ways. So we were also working with the legal part, so each person or each unit has the session of use of one small flat. Depending if it's 1, 2 person, 4 or even more, the cooperative manage the union of one of these auxiliary spaces to different typologies, with the idea that we can have the typology S, that it's about 40 square meters. This is 2 main rooms, the kitchen, bathroom, and an outdoor space. And we can have the M in different combinations, the L, the different, and even we have this idea of a cohabitation community that they have 2 typologies together with different more spaces. So it's 1/4 of a floor is from the same unit. So it's all the units have doors that you can have open or closed, and it's at the end it's an infrastructure that it's resistant to the pass of time and different needs and different units. So it's this idea of a non-hierarchical structure. We don't define where people have to have the living room or the bedroom. Is absolutely homogeneous. Around each room has around 17 square meters. And always we are playing with this kind of legal issues, and in this case we were playing with the housing agency, and this is considered a housing, but this is considered common area of private use. So that's why we don't have to build any kind of distribution and a small rooms, because this is the minimum, and in the minimum regulation you can leave the a space open and undefined. If you are doing bigger flats, we are going to be used to more concrete regulation, small rooms and bigger rooms. So we managed to have this idea of homogeneous matrix because these are not considered housing spaces. And also we were working about what is the infrastructure, what can decide the people who is going to live here, and we have only the possibility to choose about where we put the kitchen because it's the more specific part of the housing. So we can have the kitchen in the different positions to the courtyard, or here with the views to the park, or in the middle point, depends. So we have done all the project without defining who is living, and at the end each unit decide where is going to live, and they decide about the kitchen that at the end is kind of furniture, and we have all the technical connections in this piece. It's like the main connection point, so that allows to put the furniture in different ways. Then when the people start to living, that it's going to be at the end of this year, each unit has the different ideas of how they are going to live, and they are going to put different small and something that could be removable for the next one, just to define some kind of differences between the spaces to arrive to the future use. So this idea of different scales of election, and also spaces that are really are able to be appropriated for the users. And it was also important for each one to understand how they were living the program, individual program, if each one, and how they are moving this individual program to the typology, and also check if this is if the typologies have the capacity to be adapted for each of the members. And we were having different kind of materials, since maps, plans, also the different models. And this was the moment that we finally decide who is going to live in each, and they decide this idea of the kitchen and some small rooms. So for example, here they have like different pieces that they can match and put, and they decide in this workshop where they are going to put the kitchen, for example. Here, this kind of easy information for each one, where these different types of kitchen to be chosen for each members. And we have here this idea of we can close this door because the flat is going to be an M, just like this, or this is the flat that is a huge community that they have 4 big rooms for the adults, also a room for the different children are living or sleeping here together, all this area for the daily life. So in each case the use is different, and this furniture it's easy that the next inhabitant can change it and remove it in a way, so every time the layers of the life of the people can adapt the flat. And if we see a little bit about like the final architectural plans, this is the ground floor. That, as I said, we have this idea of the public passage corridor that we were like working, that this idea of open to the park and going in height. Here we have like 2 levels, double space in relation with the street. This idea of continuity, and also be really safe public space with relation with the inside and outside, about security. And we have in the facade to the street the more public program, this idea of co-working and activities, economical activities. And we have entering from the passage, also with this idea that the project came from Camp, so we wanted to enter from the park. And here we have like the dining room and the kitchen and the technical part. But it's also interesting to understand that it's also part of the common. You have to take care of the heating systems and control it, so it's a really open space, not at the end of stairs and really hide it. So if we pass to the other one, we have this idea of the double space that also connects the street and the visuals inside the cooperative. So it's the idea of urbanization in height and break this monofunctional bricks of the housing stock. So it's breaking this limit between the private and the street, the public area. We have here the common, this multi-purpose room that can have activities open to the neighborhood. We can have the General Assembly, we can have cinema, etc. So it's an open space that can be also with corridor doors open to the street. The laundry, and with these stairs we have here upstairs the guest room. And here we have, since the first floor, this housing that all in the south facade. And here we have the drawings of the people who is going to live. Through the workshops we have more or less passed this information. For example, here we can see this flat has the kitchen here, and they decide to have the common area in that way. We can see this case is one single young that has the ping pong on, so they have the common area in that side, the kitchen in the middle, and we can see different ways of using in each floor. And here we have this idea of the guest room with a bathroom for the community, and all these spaces that they have a generous side to be spaces of relation of the community. Here we can see this here we space closed. It's every time depending. And the 4, the 5, and here is where also this idea of outdoor spaces. We have the common terraces, also spaces under the atrium to be like a kind of winter gardens for the kids and for the community to stay outside. And we can see in that case, no, it's not. For example, sorry, I don't have the third floor. It's where we have this community that has the flat in the half of the. So this idea of an open infrastructure. This is the general section with these open spaces in the ground floor and this atrium. And one of the main things was this wood structure, and that's why when we built the structure is the main impact. So that if we vote in concrete, so the idea was we have a small budget, what we have to do to reduce as maximum as possible the impact in materials, and it was that maybe the layerings are a lot of surface, so it's going to be more expensive, and we start to work with this idea of wood system, because it's also about walls, structural walls, that has also this idea, or was following this idea of rooms, this matrix of rooms, so the distribution of the typologies was also the structure. And what was really interesting was that in 6 weeks we had all the wood structural settled up. So it was expensive material, but it was a shorter period of construction. So at the end we managed to have a kind of balance, and we get to pay this system. So it's the highest building in wood. So it also was an example for showing us also to the municipality and the social sector of housing production that other systems are possible with these low budgets. And it was a kind of example of construction in wood in the urban area in social housing. And also it was really interesting because in 6 weeks we had all the buildings, so the people can check the spaces and can imagine after a long period of workshops that maybe it's not easy for them. So we have here some of these sections, this contrast between like the south facade and the north facade, and also how the building is touching like the neighbors in every part. And at the end, this idea of sustainability was, we have like all the simulations to see if we are getting this idea of comfort. And it was interesting to compare the flats with the south facade and the flats with the north facade. They had 7 more times energy supply. So it's this idea of what we can solve from architecture in passive systems and the good orientation and the good planning for housing. It's the key for a sustainable building. Also this idea of the atrium, how is the wind going, and so it was important in a climate as Barcelona with a strong hot period in summer, so how it's going to go. And here we have like the breakdown ceremony, that we have people from all the agents, from municipality, economical funding, etc. So this idea of going through the construction collectively. Here some images from the construction. We have almost done the inside part. This idea of the multi-purpose room, the idea of this courtyard. We can see also these relations with the street that I was saying. We have here this continuity of the corridor, this idea of the common areas really open to the city. Understand that it is not a closed community, this idea of make neighborhood and make community. This infrastructure, all open, because it's all the structure open, then with the layering we are closing depending on the units. This relation inside, outside. And here we start to do all the layers that is required, because the wood needs some protection for fire in some parts, from acoustics, etc. So, and here we can see the main material. It's really simple system of construction. We had the main abstraction in wood. We add concrete, 7 centimeters, 2 of insulation and 7 of concrete to give thermal mass for this regulation of the temperature in winter and in summer. And then some protection for fire, it is this pink one, and just like I don't know the name of... Drywall. Exactly. So, and here we can see this flat going to have access to this room, but in here we just close with a system that it's going to be removable. With this box, we have storage, but also it's the main point for all the installations. It's just compact in that part, so the other parts are really free of technical systems. And in each unit here is going to be the furniture and the kitchen. So at the end, we are leaving really simple system. Also, like all the installations, it's like this to be appropriable and changeable by the people. Also, something that it's all the people says when it enters inside the building is that we had the maximum height possible by the regulation. So we have 3.05, 3 meters height, so that allow to enter the sun as maximum, but also give this idea of volume and quality to the spaces. And so this relation with the gallery in the south facade. Also these relations inside, we were also always managing about this idea of privacy, how we are doing the windows to avoid like this direct relation inside, but in some way also allowing this relation and seeing the life inside. And this is almost how it's going to look like, the facade inside, because inside the atrium we have less needs for the facade because it's protected by the rain, and also this atrium makes lower demand for this facade about insulation and layering. So we are leaving the wood like this. We are already like the windows and here all the distribution that is seen in order to be easy to remove and to change. So this is it's in construction, but it's almost looking like at the end. And now we are, since like 2 weeks, starting this structure. So this idea of the atrium, it was surprising because during the architectural design, all the people was focused on the sun facade, the park, and once we were here, we realized we had a super huge view of the Barcelona city and Montjuic. So it was interesting to see these two faces of the project and these terraces and atrium. So we are just like finishing this. This is from yesterday almost. So, and the final budget, I don't know if it's going to be easy for you to compare a little bit, but the total budget of the construction is 2.4 million. That is more or less the final price, 200 euros a square meter. That is the same as the social housing developers, but with energy efficient building. and with this idea of participation and social commitment. So it's not possible to do it. It was a kind of demonstration. And also with wood structure, that it's more expensive than the concrete. And also it's interesting to see that what we have done is also use the waste of the structure to do some parts of the common areas, and doing in participatory process also with construction in workshops. So during the weekends when the professional workers are not inside, so in the same premises but not inside, we are working with the future users and also people interested in the project that is going to help, and we are doing some work. And also it's a strategy to reduce the final cost, because all this is by self-construction, and it's, for example, we are doing the common areas, the kitchen and the dining room. And this was about La Borda, and it was interesting to see how the municipality had seen this experience as a model. And we started the project, and 2 or 3 years later, in 2016, they had the new housing plan of Barcelona. In this housing plan, it was interesting because they introduced the different issues that affects housing, like tourism or gentrification, the dynamics of the city, and also new ways of produce social housing. And cooperative housing was introduced in the age and actions of affordable housing, and the first step done was an open competition for 7 new plots. So this was the first plot that was set when established a leasehold for a cooperative, and now at the end it was 5, not set because it was not any people interested in 2 of them, but 5 new projects of housing cooperative in public land, and with the same ideas of community, sustainability and economical efficiency are being developed with the people. So it's another way starting to empower more people in this kind of process. And we had the opportunity to work in 2 of them. So it was interesting, and I will work really fast to see how these same principles are in new context. In this case was a plot situated near one of the main speed roads in the city of Barcelona that has the highest levels of contamination for the traffic. So we made a building that was purifying the air inside some kind of courtyards, that came the air out from the bottom part of the building, from also a park that was here. So it was thinking in different strategy. We had here also this idea of corridors to have access in the south facade, to have the main terraces also as a corridors. We have this idea of ventilation through courtyards to avoid the ventilations through the main road. And we have this idea of also this working with also a kind of matrix. So it's more or less the same scheme as La Borda. We have different sizes of L, S, M, different flats, common areas in contact with the ground. Like, for example, in this we have different common areas in contact with the park. Also, another ones are just in the terrace with all the views from Barcelona. And here we play some variations of La Borda, but how we can connect with these rooms through courtyards, and these spaces can be open or can be just connect. So it's idea of new matrix of rooms. And the same in this case in the middle of another area, but more in an urban place. It was a plot in an axis of public buildings like a hospital, elderly house, facility, school. So it was interesting to understand how a housing cooperative, it's also a kind of facility and can have a public facade to this kind of axis of the public axis of the city. And the idea was how we can put all the common areas related with the stairs and in this facade to the main street. So it was a smaller piece than La Borda, but also understanding how this has also a traffic street. We have here a high school really close, that also about acoustic but also about sound it's affecting. So we decided to put the circulations. In one side, the corridors are having a filter to the transit and to the cars. In the other side, also we have the west part with a lot of sun in summer. So how we can give different facades and this central point in the facade with all the common areas, and against this idea of matrix of spaces. Then we can see it like here. So we always giving small changes in that part. We have a more connected to the both facade, and here we have like the water connections and all installations, but this idea of also different rooms where you cannot find which is the bigger, the smaller or the higher. And here we have this image of this. We have common areas and giving like the public and the activity through the neighborhood. Here, this idea of corridors and spaces of relation through the street to have a kind of working with the different layers and giving intimacy and privacy. And here, this idea also going that way. So at the end is this idea of transition between the private and the public, this idea of sustainability and how the surroundings is affecting a lot the architecture to have a passive function, and also this idea in each case the program of the spaces are changing because of the needs of the specific community and people who is going to live. And yeah, I want to finish with this image that it's from in the Vitra Museum. Vitra Museum in Basel. It was an interesting exhibition called The New Architecture of the Collective, that it was last summer, and they were selecting this kind of collective housing and cooperative housing, and then they putting all together in a kind of neighborhood with this idea of imagining a new city and a new relation between the common spaces, the street and the private, and these new programs and more democratic cities. And it was this idea of rethinking cities from this way of doing. So it was interesting to see this new scale and new walls. So, yeah.
A la cooperativa d'habitatges La Borda volem promoure un model d'accés a l'habitatge no especulatiu, el règim en cessió d'ús.
La Borda és un projecte intergeneracional impulsat per una cinquantena de persones que desitgem que l'habitatge sigui un dret garantit efectivament i no pas un bé de consum.
També volem viure en comunitat, amb confort, en un projecte sostenible i baratet.
La Borda formem part d'un projecte més ampli, el projecte de Can Batlló. Estem organitzats en 5 comissions i diversos grups de treball. Comptem amb els serveis i la col·laboració d'algunes entitats de l'economia social.
També ens reunim freqüentment els caps de setmana, en una assemblea general, perquè entre tots i totes volem decidir tots els aspectes del nostre projecte.
Si tot va bé, el 2017 haurem construït amb les nostres mans l'edifici on viurem. Ho farem en un sòl que l'Ajuntament ens cedeix a 75 anys.
I d'aquí 75 anys serem nosaltres els que lluitarem per la Borda.
Presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.